If your teenagers prepare for the SAT in the next 6 months, I need you to stop everything you're doing right now and pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you. Because the test they're preparing for, it's not the SAT you took, and it's not even the SAT your older child took 2 years ago. The College Board completely redesigned it in 2024, and almost nobody is talking about what that actually means for your family. Right now, thousands of parents are investing time and money preparing their kids for a test that does not even exist anymore. And the heartbreaking part is, these students are going to walk into that testing room confident they're ready, only to realize that they've been training for the wrong game entirely. My name is Curtis, and before I tell you exactly what changed, let me tell you why I understand what you're going through. When I was 16 years old, I moved to the US from the Congo and I couldn't speak English. I didn't understand the American classroom culture, and when I sat down for my first math test, well, I stared at that paper feeling completely lost. Not because I didn't understand mathematics, but because I didn't understand the language wrapped around it. Well, I did terrible in that test. But something happened in those months that followed. I stopped asking myself, am I smart enough? Well, and I started asking myself, what's the system? How does this actually work? I broke down every single test, every single question, every pattern I could find until I understood the game being played. By the time I graduated, I had straight A's in every single math class at UC Berkeley, which is one of the toughest engineering programs in the country. I tell you this because preparing for the SAT is not about your child being smarter or working harder. It's about understanding the system. And right now, the system just changed on you without warning. So, here's what we're going to do together in this video. I'm going to show you exactly what's different about this new digital SAT, why it matters desperately for your child's future, and most importantly, what your child can do starting today to make sure that they're actually preparing for a test that they're going to face. Because the strategies that worked 5 years ago aren't just outdated anymore, they're sabotaging your child's score, and I can prove it. Let me show you what actually happened, and more importantly, why nobody in your circle is talking about it yet. In March 2024, the College Board didn't just update the SAT, they completely rebuilt it from the ground up. Everything your older child prepared for, everything you remember from your own testing days, all of it vanished overnight, right? So that 3 hour marathon with the number two pencil and the bubble sheet, gone forever. Here's what your teenager faces instead. They'll walk to testing room with a laptop. The test will take just over 2 hours instead of three, with fewer questions, which will sound easier until you realize what that actually means. Well, it means that every single answer carries more weight now, right? One careless mistakes costs more than it used to. But here's the part that changes absolutely everything, and I need you to really pay attention to this. The test is now adaptive. What does this adaptive mean for a child? Well, picture this. Your teenager sits down and starts the first reading section of the SAT. The computer is watching every answer they give, right? And if they perform well in that first section, the computer responds by giving them significantly harder questions in the second section. And that's actually really good news for them because qualifying for those harder questions is the only way to reach the highest grades possible, the highest scores possible. If they stumble early and they make mistakes in the first section, then the test adjusts downward. It gives them easier questions. And suddenly, that 14 or 1500 you've been hoping for becomes mathematically impossible to achieve. Now, why does this matter to you right now, today, as a parent trying to do right by your child? Well, because most SEC prep programs, the ones you're seeing advertised everywhere, the ones that your neighbors are recommending, the tutors working at your child's school, perhaps, well, they're teaching strategies designed for the old SAT, the test that no longer exists. They're teaching your child to pace themselves for 3 hours when the test runs two. They're using paper practice tests when your child desperately needs to master digital tools and interfaces. They're completely ignoring the adaptive format, which means that your teenager is going to walk into that testing room utterly unprepared. How this test actually measures them. But what I'm seeing actually breaks my heart because students who should be scoring 1400 and above walk out with a 1250, not because they didn't know the material, not because they didn't study hard enough, because nobody taught them how to take this version of the SAT. Nobody prepared them for the test that's actually waiting for them. Listen, I know you're probably sitting here wondering, is the child actually ready for this? Or perhaps you've been heading down the wrong path without realizing it. much, right? I now completely understand that anxiety because I talk to parents every single week who feel the same way you do right now. If you want real clarity on where your child actually stands and what they specifically need to do before the test, I've opened up some free strategy calls. We'll look into their situation together, figure out gaps, and map out exactly what needs to happen next. There's going to be a link right below this video. All right, let's keep going because what I'm about to show you next is something most prep programs will never tell you. Now, here's how parents still think the SAT works, right? They still have the old prep mindset, thinking that it's gonna be a written exam and it's gonna be 3 hours, it's gonna be kind of long, and this leads them to a false sense of confidence, thinking that they got it, and of course, it's gonna lead to disappointing results, right? This is how the new digital SAT system actually works in 2025 and moving forward. Right, first thing you need to get familiar with is, right, you need to understand the system. You need to understand how the system actually, this new system actually works, right? So first, you need to learn what changed, right? First thing is it no longer lasts about three hours until it's about 2 hours now, which means that you have fewer questions, which doesn't mean that it's easier. It just means that you have to be more accurate and precise because every question now carries more weight. You mess up, well, there's a high chance you're screwed. So, on top of that, the reading and writing sections are no longer separate. Now it's one single section that is combined. And finally, there's a built-in Desmos calculator. Right? So most students or parents have no idea what this is, right? But you will until they get to the test and then they realize that well, there is this new thing, and most of the time they don't end up using it, which will cost them a lot, right? So this is something else that you need to be familiar with, right? The second step is, well, you need to learn the adaptive logic of this new SAT format, right? So the first thing you need to know is the first module of each section, or the reading and writing and the math section. The first module sets the baseline on what kind of questions you're going to be getting, right? So, for example, when you take the first module of your math or English section, depending on how you do in that section, it's going to determine if whether you get a harder second module or an easier second module, right? So the computer will be learning from how you're performing. If you do well on the first module, then it's going to reward you with harder questions, which is actually what you want because when you get harder questions, then you will not have your score will not be capped, right? However, if you do poorly on the first module, then the computer will be thinking is that, well, this student is not capable of solving harder questions, so we should give them easier questions. And what that means is that your score will be capped. You're not going to be able to get to those like 1500s and 1400 score, right? Right. So this is, something new that's been added to this digital SAT format, right? So and again, so which means that you have to focus on being very accurate early on because that will decide on what kind of questions you get in the second module. And step three, right? You need to adjust your preparation. Don't focus so much on just building. I mean, of course, stamina is very important, but focus on also being very accurate, rather than just being fast. Because again, before you had a lot of questions, so you had to be very fast. Right? But now, on top of being fast, you also need to make sure that you are accurate because every mistake you make costs more, right? And again, learn Desmos, right? Learn Desmos, like I mentioned, because those tools are there because where you don't use those tools, right, it's going to negatively impact you on the test. So make sure that you're learning Desmos and the other tools that are on the screen, which I'll show you. Right. So now here are the mistakes that you need to avoid, absolutely avoid to do well on your SAT. If you make those mistakes, you can say bye-bye to your 1500 or 1400, right? So first, you need to start early, right? So that's something that you need to, because parents would think that, well, all I need is just 2 weeks of preparation, 3 weeks or so. But you actually need about 6 to 9 months of prep in order to really effectively prepare for your SAT, right? Because thinking that you can just wake up and, get a couple of like sessions or study a little bit and then be an expert, learn, get familiar with, all of the digital aspect of this test, and on top of being familiar with the concepts, being fast, being accurate, it's not realistic, right? Some parents would kind of like, I talk to parents all the time where they would reach out at like when the kid is the child is a senior, and they have basically about a month to prepare, and they want to their current score is, say, for example, a 1200, and they want to get to a 1500 in like 3 weeks or so, right? That's it's not going to happen, right? So you need to keep this in mind, right? So another thing is that you don't want to rely on only free tools. Free tools are really good. For example, Khan Academy, right? It's really good. However, if you only rely on that, well, it's going to be difficult for you to really get the results you want, because care category is not personalized to your weaknesses, right? It's good if you want to use it to target specific weaknesses. For example, you know that you struggle with quadratic equations, right? Then you'll use Khan Academy to practice specifically on the topic of quadratic equations and get better at it, right? However, if you just go on there are multiple topics and question you all but just wasting time trying to finish all the problems are all in there, and you're even working on things that you already know, you're just wasting time at that point, right? So make sure that you're using it to really target your specific weaknesses. And that's the problem with free tools, right? And some of them do not have, for example, the adaptive feature of the actual SAT, right? Yeah, so don't rely only on free tools, right? Because again, like I mentioned, you will be just working on problems that you already know, and sometimes wasting time. And because it's not personalized, it's not focusing on what your actual weaknesses are. And use diagnostics to find your weak points. Right? You need to diagnose yourself. You need to know what are your weak points, right? And so that you don't just end up wasting time. Another mistake that you want to avoid is the parents would think that, well, my kid is, my child has a 4.0, and so they don't need to really prepare for the SAT because they're obviously doing very well in school. They have an A in math. Well, that's another mistake that you absolutely want to avoid, because I see this all the time. Parents would reach out because they'll say that, well, my child has a 4.0, but still the score like a 900 on the SAT. And they'll be shocked. It's just like, how is it possible to score a 900 and have an A in your math class, right? That's another common mistake that parents make, right? Because you need to be strategic on the SAT, because strategy will actually beat intelligence in this. Just because, again, like I mentioned, there are a lot more going on there. They're going to be testing you on things that you've learned since freshman year in high school, right? It's going to be, you may know, for example, how to solve a problem, but it may take you 10 minutes. All right. However, if you knew like the proper strategy, pattern recognition, it would take you 10 seconds or 30 seconds to solve that same problem, right? And this is another thing that parents don't pay attention, or students don't pay attention to, right? It's like, I knew the problems, but yeah, you're going to run out of time at trying to figure them out because you didn't prepare accordingly, right? There are some problems that are on there because they want you to use the tools, the digital tools that they have on there. Because if you don't use them, then you end up wasting a lot of time as well, right? So you want to practice inside of a Bluebook app, for example, because then that will give you a very good idea of what the actual digital SAT will look like. So now, here's what you need to do well, to make sure that you're doing well on the SAT. If you do not do this, it's not going to work. You will not perform well on your SAT. So we're going to go over it, right? So you need to get familiar, I mentioned, with digital fluency and strategy. So one, you need to practice inside of the Bluebook environment, or you could use an interface that actually helps you practice use in this digital format, right? For example, it gives you so your math score, reading and writing score, it gives you the how many questions you've missed in each section, right? And it actually looks like the actual SAT, which is how much time you spent on the question, and it gives you like an option to cross out the answer to eliminate the answers that you think that are not correct, right? Right. So that's something that you need to be practicing. You need to be practicing using those platforms, right? For example, I had a student who I will call him Mark, right? So they reached out, they had 1,300 on every time they would practice using but watch what they were actually doing was they were using paper and pencil to practice for their SAT, and it was scoring around 1,300 every time. And when they reached out, and I had them take a test on using the Blue Book, right? And the score was around 1,100, and they were shocked because that they were ready, and the test was about 3 weeks away. So what we focused on was we only focused on getting familiar with Desmos, annotation tools, answer eliminator to make sure that they're really familiar with the task. So we didn't learn any new content, but we only focused on helping them really master, the digital format, right? Uh, for example, there are some questions where it would require, say, 30 minutes to solve by hand. But if you just plot it, right? For example, if you just plot the question and then you can just find where the answer is and things like that, it just like makes things way easier. And Mark was able to score a 1350 on their actual SAT when they took it, right? After working with us. So that's something else you need to pay attention to. Well, set three, you need to use analog and digital, right? So I know I just said, you need to get familiar with the digital platform and then all of that. But now I'm saying that you have to use the analog strategy again to do well. Well, let me explain. Because now, this for the college or a student. Now they've added, for example, powerful tools such as Desmos, and they know that now students are relying too much on Desmos, right? They're relying too much on the digital tools that have been provided to them that they don't understand the concepts behind what they're doing. So basically, they're just too much in their head. Instead of writing down the problems, working out the problems and then getting to the answer, right? And seeing the problems, how they get to the answer in front of them, right? They're doing all of that in their head, right? And using digital tools, right, to just get to the answer. But what that does is that it's very easy for them to make mistakes. One, two, sometimes they don't really understand how to get to the answer without Desmos, without the calculator. And they don't know how to work all the problems. What that means is that it's easy for them to get confused if the college board just throws like a trick question in there, right? Then all of a sudden they get confused. They don't know how to because they don't have a fundamental understanding of how to solve the problems, then as soon as something looks different, they don't know how to apply the same concepts and how to get to the answer, right? So you need to make sure that you're writing down everything because when you're taking the test, you're gonna have a scratch paper, right? So you need to write out your thoughts. That way, again, you might be thinking Thor, right? But by the time you know, you have too many things in your head, the thought becomes a six and you write a six. But if it's written down where you can always group up your paper and realize, oh, okay, yeah, I have a four here, and then that's what we're gonna put. So it just helps to keep everything organized. But although it's like, okay, you can have all of this, some students are like, oh my God, this is so easy. I don't have to understand. I don't have to memorize all of the integrations of circles and all of that. I just have to graph them, right? But the problem is if you don't understand how everything is connected, how you can solve those problems, and then it's very easy for you to get confused. So you still need to understand how to work out those problems and then use those digital tools to just boost you and make you both even faster, right? And use scratch paper to organize your thoughts, because you want to reduce cognitive load and increase precision in the work that you're doing. Because again, remember, in this format, precision, you want to prioritize precision rather than speed. Because with the number of questions have been reduced, so students have more time to complete it. And by following these steps, right, understanding the system, avoid the common mistakes that most students make, and getting familiar with the digital format, this is how you can get to those high scores such as 1500 plus on your SAT. Now listen, I want to bring everything we've talked about into focus for you. The SAT your child is preparing to take, has fundamentally transformed. It's digital, it's adaptive. It requires a completely different approach than the test you might remember or the test that their older sibling took just a few years ago, right? And here's what I really want you to understand, what I really want you to hold on to as you think about your next step. This is not about your child not being smart, right? Or, it's not about them not caring enough or not working hard enough. I know you've got a good kid who's trying their best. This is about making certain they're preparing for the right test with the right tools and the right strategy. Because I've sat across from too many devastated parents after test day, parents who did everything they thought was right, who invested time, money, energy only to watch their child walk out with a score that didn't come close to reflecting their actual ability. And this breaks my heart every single time because it was preventable, right? So here's what I'm offering, and I want you to really hear this as the genuine invitation it is. I'm opening up 3 strategy calls for families who want absolute clarity on where their child stands right now. We're going to look at their current situation together. We will talk about their target schools, their timeline, where they're losing points, and what their specific weak areas are. And I'm going to give you a clear, honest roadmap of what exactly needs to happen between now and test day. You can book the call using the link in the description right below this video. If you're watching on your phone, it's also going to be pinned in the comment section at the top. So click it, pick a time that works for your schedule. And listen, if you decide this is not for you, and even if you want to handle this preparation on your own, I need you to do one thing for me to right. Just make sure your child downloads the Bluebook app and takes at least one full practice test in a digital format. Not tomorrow, right? Not next week, tonight. Because content knowledge is only half of what determines your score. The other half is being comfortable with technology. The interface, but the way questions appear on the screen, the tools they'll have access to, right? Those all count. And if they're seeing that digital format for the first time on the actual test day, you're asking them to learn a new skill in the middle of the most important test of their high school career. Your child is capable of an incredible score, I believe that. But they need to be prepared for the test they're actually taking, not the test that used to exist or the test that you remember. So the link is right there below. Book a time. Let's make sure your child walks onto that testing room completely ready for what's waiting. Thanks for being here. And thank you for caring enough about your child's future to watch this video till the end. And I'll see you in the next one.